It started with a desperate urge to scratch the itch deep inside his eardrum. He would try anything to satisfy it. Watching him try to get at the itch was like watching someone lose their mind. Repeated attempts had turned Mike's ear red raw, and by the time he asked me to look inside, there was already a mountain of cotton swabs, bobby pins and pencils scattered around his desk. My advice was to see a doctor, but Mike refused, stating his resentment due to past complications. Realising my protests would not get through to him, and, honestly, curious, I told him that I would look inside. At first, it was hard to identify the problem, because his previous attempts had blocked his ear with a mixture of dried blood and wax. Using a bobby pin, I scraped away the gunk, and I found a white sack lodged deep inside the canal. We tried everything to get it out, but by the end of the night, we had to stop because of the pain. Again, I told him to see a doctor. It was a simple procedure. It would save him the trouble of dealing with it himself. He told me he would sleep on it, and I left shaking my head at his stubbornness. A week passed, and I hadn't heard from him despite my messages and calls. My mother said vegetable oil could help his situation, so I decided to bring some over and check on him. When I knocked on the door, it took him longer than usual to answer. And when he did, the door only creaked open a few inches. His eyes peered at me, and I told him about the vegetable oil and my concern for his well-being. Eventually, I convinced him to open the door and let me inside. Mike looked pale. Dark bags sat under his eyes, and a trail of dried blood ran down his infected ear, giving off a smell I can't even begin to describe. I started to insist that he see a doctor, but he cut me off mid-sentence. No, it's fine. I'm a mother now. Come see," Mike said, with a smile radiating genuine joy. I followed him into the kitchen to find a bench littered with glass jars and containers. "I have someone who wants to meet you guys," he called. "Adam, meet Jerry, Angela, Jessica and Barry." Mike pointed to a different container with each name as the list continued. Looking inside one of the containers, a grey spider the size of my hand raised its front legs defensively, and I backed away, trying to convince myself he was just playing a prank. "Don't worry, Barry. Adam's easily scared. It's nothing personal," Mike cooed. I was ready to call him out on his crap when I noticed another black spider running across his table, and I screamed. Mike only offered a heart-filled chuckle in response. "Chuck's a bit of a troublemaker. He doesn't like being cooped up inside these containers. But how else do I keep them safe?" As he spoke, his eyes started twitching, and two large, hairy legs began to appear from his ear. I watched as a long, black spider squeezed out and crawled across his face. How is that possible?" I stammered. "Oh?" he said, looking up at the spider now sitting in his hair. "At first it really hurt, but I made some room and now it just tickles." Turning his head sideways, I could see he had cut the cartilage of his ear to widen the hole. Unable to believe what I was seeing, I just stood there, staring, while Mike continued to smile at me. A slight tickle on the right side of my neck interrupted my thoughts, and I lowered my gaze to see a large black spider looking back at me. In a panic, I jumped and flicked the spider off my shoulder and onto the floor. "Oh, Chuck!" Mike screamed, running to pick up the spider. The spiders were now clinging to the side of the jars in an effort to face me, and I physically felt the weight of 100 eyes staring back at me. "You need to leave," Mike said, with glaring eyes as Chuck limped into his hands. Trying to explain it was an accident only added fuel to Mike's anger, and he screamed at me, "Get out of my house, Adam!" Obeying his request, I left the house, but I called the police to do a welfare check. Embarrassed and sure they wouldn't believe me, I left out the fact that spiders were coming out of his ear. 2 more weeks passed, and I hadn't heard anything from the police or Mike, so I decided to make another visit. This time, Mike didn't answer, and I jumped over the fence to peer through a window that was now covered in silk. A cocooned figure was slumped over the couch, and in a panic, I broke through the window to get inside. Running over, I started to pull away the silk from his face, while pleading with Mike to respond. Unmasking the figure, I found that it was in fact Mike. Where his eyes should have been, there were spiders, gnashing their mandibles inside of his empty sockets. I shook him, hoping to see some sign of life, but he felt light, almost hollow. "Motherhood is tough," a woman's voice spoke to me. My eyes widened, and I turned in the direction of the voice to see 6 pink, flesh-covered limbs with large jet-black hairs spouting out, covering half of the ceiling. They contorted down the wall and closer toward me. My body froze with fear as 6 red eyes met my own, its large mandibles dripping as it formulated another sentence. "I prefer surrogacy." I tried to run, but instead toppled over and fell out of my shoes. Confused, I looked back to find the silk had glued them to the floor. Backing away on my hands and feet, but still facing the creature, I felt something crunch under the weight of my palm. Feeling a warm liquid ooze over my hand, I pulled it up to my face to see a mixture of blue and green goo now covering it. Where my palm had been was now a crumpled up black spider, still attempting to move in my direction. A high-pitched scream came from the creature's mandibles, and its large pink abdomen wobbled as its pace quickened in pursuit. I jumped to my feet and ran for the door. The sound of glass jars smashing followed me as the creature maneuvered its body through the house. My hand slipped off the key in the deadlock, and I looked back as my heart raced. Spiders started appearing from every crevice of the house and marched behind the thing charging towards me. As the creature extended its front limbs, attempting to take hold of me, the key turned and I fell to my knees outside. Wasting no time, I sprinted away from the house, leaving my car and not bothering to look back. Nothing followed, and although the police found Mike the same way I had, they still didn't believe my story. Grieving the death of my friend was hard, but the gossip and questions made it 10 times worse. There wasn't a soul in town who believed me, and I'm sure my version of events are bound to become small-town folklore, told only in schoolyards and at sleepovers. They almost had me convinced I'd lost my mind, until I started to feel an itch inside my own ear. At first I was scared, but the feeling passed when a strange thought invaded my mind. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to be a mother.